The judge slammed his gavel against the bench. $500? Case closed? The sound echoed across the courtroom. A few people nodded. Others began gathering their papers, assuming the hearing was over. To everyone in the room, it looked like an ordinary case. A middle-aged black woman stood quietly before the bench, dressed in a modest blue suit. She wasn't surrounded by assistants. She carried no designer handbag. There were no cameras following her. She looked like someone the judge could easily dismiss. Judge William Parker leaned back in his chair with confidence. For over 20 years, he had ruled from that courtroom. People feared him, lawyers respected him, and most defendants rarely questioned his decisions. But today was different, because the woman standing before him wasn't what she appeared to be. Her name was Angela Brooks, and before the day ended, the judge would wish he had never spoken to her the way he did. Angela looked down at the fine notice in her hands. Then she calmly raised her eyes. "Your Honor," she said politely, "may I ask a question?" The judge sighed dramatically. He was already irritated. The courtroom had been crowded all morning, and he wanted to move on to the next case. "You may ask," he replied. Angela took a breath. "Could you explain the legal basis for this fine?" Several people in the audience exchanged glances. It was a simple question. But the judge didn't like it. His expression hardened. "The legal basis is my ruling," he said sharply. A few people chuckled. Angela remained calm. "Respectfully, Your Honor, every ruling should be supported by specific legal authority." The room became quiet. The judge's eyes narrowed. Nobody challenged him in open court, especially not someone who looked like an ordinary citizen. He leaned forward. "Are you attempting to teach this court how the law works?" Laughter spread through the gallery. Angela said nothing. The judge smirked. What happened next would change everything. Judge Parker enjoyed being the smartest person in the room. At least that's what he believed. He glanced toward the spectators and noticed several people smiling. That encouraged him. "Ma'am," he said sarcastically, "perhaps you've been watching too many courtroom television shows." More laughter. Angela stood perfectly still. No anger, no embarrassment, no fear. And somehow that made the judge even more annoyed. Most people would have lowered their heads by now. Most people would have apologized, but not Angela. She simply waited, patiently, confidently, as though she knew something nobody else did. The judge tapped his pen against the bench. "Let me guess," he continued. "You read something online and suddenly think you're a lawyer." The courtroom erupted again. Even a few attorneys smiled. Angela finally spoke. "No, Your Honor." The judge raised an eyebrow. "No?" "No, I don't think I'm a lawyer." The judge laughed. "Then we're making progress." Angela's expression never changed, because she was, in fact, a lawyer, not only a lawyer, one of the most influential attorneys in the entire state, but nobody in that room knew it yet. The judge looked toward the clerk. "Anything else before we move on?" The clerk hesitated. "Actually, Your Honor." The young man looked nervous, very nervous. Judge Parker frowned. "What is it?" The clerk swallowed hard. "A representative from the State Bar Association is scheduled to attend today's proceedings." The judge shrugged. "So?" The clerk glanced toward Angela, and suddenly the atmosphere changed. The judge followed the clerk's gaze. His eyes landed on Angela. For the first time that morning, uncertainty crossed his face. "What are you trying to say?" he asked. The clerk shifted uncomfortably. "I was informed this morning that the representative would be arriving personally." The judge laughed. "And?" The clerk hesitated again. Then he quietly answered, "She's already here." The courtroom froze. Judge Parker looked around. He saw no one important. No famous attorney, no government official, no legal celebrity. Only Angela, standing calmly before him. Then realization slowly began forming in his mind. "No." The judge looked directly at her. Angela folded her hands. The clerk nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Silence, a silence so heavy that nobody dared move. Judge Parker suddenly felt uncomfortable, for the first time all morning, because he realized there was only one person the clerk could possibly mean: Angela Brooks, the woman he had mocked, the woman he had laughed at, the woman he had just treated like she knew nothing about the law. The judge cleared his throat. Ms. Brooks, Angela waited. Are you affiliated with the State Bar Association? Several spectators leaned forward. Everyone wanted to hear the answer. Angela smiled slightly. Yes, Your Honor. The judge's stomach tightened, but Angela wasn't finished, and what she said next would leave the entire courtroom speechless. I am affiliated with the State Bar Association, Angela said calmly. Then she paused. The courtroom held its breath. I currently serve as its president. For a moment, nobody reacted. The words seemed too unbelievable to process. Then the room exploded into whispers. People looked at one another in shock. One attorney nearly dropped his briefcase. The clerk stared at the floor. And Judge Parker? He looked as though every ounce of color had drained from his face. The president of the State Bar Association, the person responsible for representing thousands of lawyers, the person whose recommendations influenced judicial evaluations, the person many judges hoped never to disappoint, and he had just humiliated her in open court. The judge suddenly remembered every sarcastic comment he had made, every laugh, every insult, every dismissive remark. Now they sounded very different. Angela wasn't smiling. She wasn't enjoying his discomfort. She simply stood there with dignity. That somehow made the situation even worse. The judge attempted a nervous laugh. Well, that certainly wasn't in the case file. Nobody laughed with him, not a single person. The room had completely changed. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone could feel it, including the judge. Judge Parker adjusted his robe. His hands were shaking slightly. For years he had believed authority came from a title, a position, a bench. But at that moment he learned something important. Real authority doesn't need to announce itself. Angela never told anyone who she was. She never demanded special treatment. She never interrupted. She never threatened anyone. She simply asked a legal question, a reasonable question. And instead of answering it, the judge chose to mock her. The courtroom remained silent. Finally, Angela spoke. Your Honor, may I say something? The judge nodded immediately. Of course. Angela looked around the room. Then she addressed everyone. Today isn't really about me. People listened carefully. It's about assumptions. Nobody moved. She continued. When we decide what a person knows, what they deserve, or how valuable they are based only on appearance, we stop seeing people clearly. The words hit the room like thunder. Several attorneys lowered their eyes, because they had laughed too, not just the judge, many of them. Angela's voice remained calm. The law exists to ensure fairness, but fairness becomes impossible when prejudice enters the room. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the judge couldn't look directly at her. A few minutes later, Judge Parker did something nobody expected. He stood up. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. The entire courtroom watched. Ms. Brooks, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. Nobody had ever heard him speak like that before. The judge looked genuinely ashamed. I failed to show the respect that every person deserves. Angela nodded politely. The room remained silent. Then she offered a response nobody expected. I accept your apology. The judge looked relieved, but Angela continued. However, I hope this experience is remembered for a reason larger than either of us. The courtroom listened carefully. Every day, people walk into courtrooms feeling powerless. She paused. They deserve dignity before anyone knows their title, position, or accomplishments. The room fell silent once more, because everyone understood the truth behind those words. Respect should not depend on status. Kindness should not depend on power, and character is revealed not by how we treat important people, but by how we treat people we believe are unimportant. Years later, many would forget the fine, they would forget the case, they would even forget the judge's name, but they would never forget the lesson from that day. Never judge someone by appearance, because the person standing quietly before you today may be the very person whose respect you'll need tomorrow.